Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to talk about why I hate VRM thermal testing. Absolutely despise it. It is the most awful thing to do ever. So here we have 3 ITX motherboards, and just like, I don't know, like the main issue here is I don't know what voltage any of these were running, because none of them offer equivalent voltage measurement methods. Okay, basically, what one board, like what gives you one voltage on one board will not necessarily give you the same voltage on another board. So it's basically impossible to do like proper comparisons as a result of that. Um, and yeah, so I'm really not pleased with that. Because yeah, it's just like basically like there is a way to do this that would like work and be bulletproof, but it's super inconvenient, and I don't really feel like retesting all 3 boards just to do one video, right? Like, because here's the thing, I have a massive backlog of just stuff to do, and it's just like, I just want to get this bloody over with. And so when I started testing the Z390 Phantom Gaming ITX, and I found out that it was running way less power at similar settings to the other 2 boards, I was just like, what like, I think I spent like several hours trying to get this board to get the same kind of power consumption in non-AVX Prime 95 as the other 2 boards. I could never actually reach 315 watts. I think the highest I managed was like 270 something watts. And at that point I was like, well, or maybe 280 or something like that. I never actually hit 315. And so at that point, I was just like, okay, you know what? Screw it. I'll just run AVX Prime 95 because that pulls more power than either of the other 2. It runs way hotter on the CPU than either of the other 2. So obviously this is delivering more power into the, like, this has to be pulling more power than the other 2. Right, because like the 8-pin, there's more power going into the board through the 8-pin. The CPU is running hotter, so everything's pointing towards this actually being the most stressful configuration in this entire, test, like in this entire chart. And at 1100 RPM on the fan, which was attached like so, directly over the VRM heatsink, which is similar to how I had the fan attached for all of the other boards. This board is getting 93 degrees Celsius on the K-type, which is comparable between all of the boards. And then for the VRM software temperature, the thing is, these are 60 amp smart power stages. So that temperature reading is internal, and it might be higher accuracy than what you get from even like your regular, international rectifier power stages. I'm not entirely sure. So internal temperature and external temperature, like the external temperatures are comparable across the boards. The software temperature is not necessarily, because like this board's using dual NFETs, so this is actually just another external sensor. This one does use power stages, but I'm not sure. It might be an external sensor, it might be an internal sensor. It should be internal, but I don't know for sure. And with this one's like, I'm assuming this one's almost certainly internal, because this is actually from the SVID voltage controller monitoring for VRM thermal readout, whereas this is like from the I think it was still from the 35201. I can't remember. It's been ages since I tested that board. So basically, testing VRM thermals bloody sucks. Because there are so many variables to account for, right? From like CPU voltage, freaking, like, if it was just the voltage, but basically the voltage, the main problem with the voltage is like you need to get the LLCs to match up and the voltages to match up. So yeah, there's the voltage issues, and then there's just like, well, it just sucks. And then there's the software temperature readings not necessarily being comparable. But anyway, like the external reading between the Phantom Gaming ITX and like the Gaming Edge AC, both boards are around that 93 degree mark. And this one's running significantly less fan RPM while also pulling slightly more power. So I'm going to say this board has a better VRM than this board. Okay, which it has, like, on paper, this is the better VRM. And then with these results, I'm going to say it's still the better VRM. I'm actually surprised that it needed a fan, and it did indeed need a fan, because without the fan, at 266 watts of power consumption, this thing was hitting 111 degrees on the K-type and 119 internal temperature, so you can't run it passive. Even at reduced loads, like most of the ITX boards here, passive, not really a thing, okay? Trying to run ITX boards passive just doesn't really go that well. For the Gaming Edge AC, it might have been possible at 243 watts. And on the Z390 iPro Wi-Fi, it was possible around the 200 watt mark. But the thing is, like, to run, basically to run, you know, like, well, the thing is with passive testing, it just takes forever, right? Because this took an hour and 15 minutes before it reached that 111 degrees. Because the thing is like after 30 minutes, I think the VRM was at like 100 degrees, and I was like, okay, you know, it should max out soon. 35 minutes later, it was at 104 degrees. Or actually, no, it wasn't like 104 degrees. It was like 102. And then another 5 minutes later, it was at 103. And then another 5 minutes later, it was at 103.5. And I was like, when is it going to stop rising? Well, it didn't stop until it was at 111. And actually, at 111, it didn't necessarily stop. It was just like, it took so long for the temperature to increase the next fraction of a degree again that I was just like, okay, you know what? We're going to call this equilibrium and roll with it, because, you know, at this point, the temperature might have been rising 0.1 degree per hour. And I'm like, no, I'm not waiting for that, right? I'm absolutely not waiting for that. So that's where I called it a day with the temperature test, because, yeah, but basically because as the surface temperature of the heatsink increases, the heatsink gets better at, you know, shedding heat. So it takes longer and longer for the next temperature increase as the temperature, you know, as the VRM produces heat. So, and eventually eventually it'll stop rising. But that takes so long to actually happen that, like, I wasn't ready to wait for that. So after an hour, 15 minutes, which, like, that tends to be around where most of most of my passive testing ends up landing, is around an hour. I think the longest was a board that took an hour and 45 minutes because the heatsinks were just ridiculously heavy. They didn't really have much in the way of surface area, but they were just very, very heavy. So, you know, you could shove heat in them for, well, hours basically before anything really happened. But yeah, so this board, you can't really run it passive because, you know, it's still hitting 111 degrees in the VRM area. And, well, these capacitors are, like, ASRock does use some high endurance capacitors compared to some like most other board vendors. These are rated for freaking 12,000 hours at 105 degrees, which is admittedly only 20% more than everybody else does. Normally you're looking at, well, high-end boards, you're looking at 10,000 hours at 105 degrees for most other board vendors. Or 5,000 hours, in which case this is actually more than double that. But yeah, like, it depends on the specific board you're looking at, because basically for modern motherboards, you're looking at, like, either 5,000 hours or 10,000 hours ratings, and then there's ASRock, who like to use their 12,000 hour rated parts. But anyway, like, it's 12,000 hours at 105 degrees. Yes, like, I'd still say it's just better to not run it at the freaking rated temperature, right? Like, you'd want to be a couple degrees below that anyway. So I wouldn't recommend running the board passive. Like, you can, but if you're actually, you know, using the board in, you know, high stress workloads, I'd say just put a bloody fan on it, right? Like, just zip, like, you don't, yeah, it's not pretty. It might be kind of awkward to fit into your setup depending on how your setup is configured, but, like, it leads to, like, because here's the thing, it leads to such a massive temperature drop. This is 1100 RPM. Like, this is nothing as far as, like, fan speeds go, right? Like, up here, this board, I was hitting that with almost 5K because the VRM heatsink on that thing is really, really anemic. But, Here, the main issue is that the heatsink that ASRock has, like this is a nice high surface area heatsink, is just also really relatively high fin density, so you need to force the air into it in order for any cooling to actually happen. Also, I think ASRock could have really gone ahead and like extended the heatsink a bit. Maybe they could have opted for a better thermal pad. It's also worth noting that this cover here is primarily for the M.2, so there's no thermal interface between this cover and the heatsink that heat pipe actually connects to. So overall, it's like, you know, like ASRock could have, you might be, like maybe if you tweak if the heatsink design on this board was a bit different, it might be able to do passive, but as it is, I'd say the easiest solution is just attach a fan to it. And I could have honestly tested with like a 40 millimeter fan, but the thing is I tested all of the other boards with a 70 millimeter fan. So I wanted to keep at least that consistent where it's like, okay, we're, you know, same size fan for all of them. Anyway, so that leads to an absolutely huge temperature drop, right? We go from 111 straight to 93. Yeah, that's much better. So yeah, overall, I'd say like the VRM thermals on this board, like they're like the VRM's just better. It runs cooler. It needs less RPM to run cooler. You still can't run it passive because the thing is like, yes, this VRM is rather efficient. It's still a 5-phase, and it's just like all of that heat that it produces is just concentrated into a really small area of the motherboard. So yeah, that really, like, that's kind of the main issue, is just like with ITX boards, there's not enough space to do any proper cooling. And the other thing is, I think ASRock could have really maybe opted, like, this is a 5+2 phase configuration, but they could have gone for a 6+1 so that they'd have 6 phases V-core and 1 phase iGPU. But yeah, they decided to go for 5+2, which I'm really not sure why. I feel like it's really a waste of like, because you could still do a 6+2 as well. You just need a doubler. And that admittedly on an ITX board is a problem because there's just not much space to do anything. But yeah, I would have preferred I would have preferred 6 phases V-core, even if it meant a 6+1, you know, for the iGPU. But yeah, so those are the results. They're not very comparable, unfortunately. You know, and the thing is like, I don't want to, like, I'm both unhappy with this data, but I'm also not, like, ultimately, like, here's the thing. If I go out and then retest all of this better, ultimately the conclusion is still going to be, or at least here's my assumption, the conclusion is still going to be that this board is better than this board, and that this board is also better than that board, right? So why do that when this terrible data already tells us that? Not very accurately, mind you, but it does tell us that. So yeah, that's the main issue here, is like, this data isn't great, but it does the thing, kinda, right? Yeah, and I'm also not sure why I'm so damn tired. It's only 9 p.m. It's really weird. The last couple of days I've been super sleepy for some reason. Or more like, not super sleepy, I've been sleepy at a weird time. Because normally my sleep schedule is like completely screwed up, and I go to sleep at like 3 a.m. and then the last couple of days for some reason it's been like 9 p.m. I'm not even used to saying the word 9 p.m. as a time. What time is that? Anyway, so yeah, that's the thing, is like, yes, the Phantom Gaming ITX with its more expensive VRM and better VRM, well, not really better. Like, I still prefer the thermal management design of the MSI board, because the crazy thing is, like, the MSI board's VRM is not that different from the Gigabyte one. And yet it manages much better thermals because MSI actually put some effort into their heat sinks and how their VRM is laid out. Whereas ASRock kind of just brute forced it with we have better power stages than everybody else. We admit it, like they have one phase less than everybody else. Actually, no, they don't have one phase less than everybody else because Asus is running a 3-phase, but they have one power stage less in VCore than everybody else. And then they have a heatsink that, like, yes, it has a heat pipe, but I'm not sure how much that heat pipe is actually achieving because it goes to another, like, kind of useless slab. Like, it basically goes into a rather useless slab of aluminum. And at this point, I'm not sure, like, you know, I'm talking about, like, oh, you could maybe add some thermal interface between the M.2 cover and the actual, like, the aluminum block that the heat pipe goes into, and then replace the thermal pad. And it's like, I'm kind of tempted to see what that does, but at the same time, I'm not tempted to wait for an hour, you know, for results. So it's just like, I hate thermal testing. I absolutely hate thermal testing because it's like the results are legitimately interesting, in my opinion. Like, they're interesting. Getting the results sucks because you're basically just sitting there waiting for something, like just waiting and waiting and waiting and more waiting. And then you get results and you're like, I think there's a measurement error. And then you have to go and, like, freaking redo all of the bloody waiting. And it's just like, it sucks. I hate thermal testing. I absolutely hate thermal testing. But I don't hate the ASRock Z390 Phantom Gaming ITX. It's pretty much the best, it's pretty much the VRM wise, it's pretty much the best ITX. Like, it's the best ITX board on Z390 that I've tested. I have I'm not sure. Like, the Asus one does some interesting things, but I have my doubts about that one actually being good, but for different reasons. But yeah, out of the boards I've tested for VRM thermals, the Phantom Gaming ITX is definitely the best ITX. But, you know, memory support wise, MSI, like this board's memory overclocking capabilities are absolutely insane. Like, this board rivals, like, $300 plus, like, extreme overclocking focused motherboards because it, like, I guess what basically happened at MSI is just like, well, we can't do a real extreme overclocking motherboard, but we are going to be making a 2-DIM ITX, so we might as well just throw, like, ridiculous memory overclocking support onto the only 2-DIM board we're making for Z390. And that does mean, like, the memory overclocking on this thing is incredible. Like, my perfect board for Z390 would be, like, the Z390 Phantom Gaming with this board's memory, with this board's memory system, right? Or more like this board with, well, actually, yeah. If you took the gaming edge and you took the power stages off, like the VRM off of this, and then, like, it'd be basically a mishmash between these two. Because, yeah, they're just so down. Like, this one's great for memory overclocking, and the VRM on this one's really good. Yeah, and ultimately, like, for day-to-day usage, so the thing about the memory overclocking is, if you don't need more than 16 gigs of RAM, because this is where, like, the memory overclocking, I guess we're including memory overclocking in this video, even though it was supposed to be only about thermals, but we've gotten into this, we may as well finish it. So, the thing with this board is it, like most Z390 motherboards I've tested, it absolutely has no idea how to deal with dual rank memory sticks. No idea whatsoever. Like, I've managed to coax it into doing 4000 megahertz on 2x16. But the amount of effort I had to go to do that is insane. Like, I was manually configuring freaking memory controller settings that MSI straight up hides from you because MSI thinks they know better than you. And they're right about that. They do, because even with all of the work I put in, I never got this board past, like, I think I got maybe 4133 out of it on 2x16, and that wasn't very stable. On the MSI board, I take those same 16 gig sticks, I stick them in there, you know, I loosen out the timings, I set 4266, bam. Immediately works. Like, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to know, and like, you don't basically need to touch anything because you just set the primaries, set the voltage, set the frequency. Board takes care of everything else for you. Phantom Gaming ITX doesn't do that. You need to basically configure the entire memory controller yourself because the board itself will just throw in a bunch of settings that don't work. But on 8 gig sticks, it works fine. Though I've not managed to, well, I've not really tested this board with 8 gig sticks as extensively as the Gaming Edge AC. Now with 8 gig sticks, the thing is for day-to-day usage, I still wouldn't go above like 4400 megahertz anyway, and at least up to 4400 megahertz, this board works great. This board works great up to like 4800, but 4800 starts being a case of like, do you like your memory controller or not? Because most chips can't do that without extremely high voltages for VCCSA. So yeah, that's kind of the thing, is just like, you know, this board's memory overclocking is insane, but it's not like, it's insane to the point of not necessarily being practical unless you want to run like 2x16 configurations, in which case this just kind of like, I have yet to see a Z3, like I've yet to test a Z390 board with 2x16 that does better than the Gaming Edge, like the ITX Gaming Edge board does. And then for 2x8, I mean, there's other boards that match it. Right, that's kind of like the best I've seen so far for 2x8. So yeah, but then the VRM on this thing is really not that great. And you know, if you're running a daily system, with say like, especially if you're running a daily system with a 9900K, you know, you're not gonna. I'd go with this. And even there, it's like if you're running 2x16, this board works fine up to like 3733. On 2x16. Past 3733, things get really hard. So yeah. But that's kind of that. Is just like, so for daily, I would probably, like, the thing is, go like 37, well, nah, 3733 to 4266 is a straight up 500 megahertz memory clock difference. So I guess priorities, right? Like, that's the thing, is just like there's no, well, it's more like ITX is a form factor that's like, your motherboard is so small that it's physically hard to get a proper VRM on it. So at that point, you just kind of have to accept that there's going to be compromises. So yeah, I think, but still, I'd say this is like, the VRM is great, and overall the board's well rounded. It's just like this board is just ridiculous at memory overclocking. And that just like, yeah. And the VRM on this one's just not bad enough, in my opinion, to ignore it completely. Whereas with this one, it's just like, like, it's a better VRM, but it's just like, the rest of the board, please, could that be better too? But anyway, I think at this point, you know, I'm just repeating myself. Like, pick your own poison, basically, between these two. As far as I'm concerned, just pick your own poison. I'm not gonna say one is significantly better than the other, because it's just like, each has their strengths and weaknesses. So anyway, that's it for this disaster of a video. And it is a disaster, because like the testing was awful, in my opinion. And yeah, thanks for watching, I guess. I mean, thanks for suffering through this with me. And yeah, I guess like, share, subscribe, so you don't miss future you know, torture like this. And what else was there? Right, if you'd like to support what I do. Oh, I forgot to thank, yeah, I forgot to mention this. Huge thanks to the guy who actually like paid for the Phantom Gaming ITX. I didn't end up buying this board, but you know, a fan of the channel was like, hey Buildzoid, what would it take for you to review this motherboard? And I was like, well, I'd need to get it somehow. And he was like, I'll buy it for you. And I was like, okay, cool. So huge thanks to the guy for you know, paying for the board, because otherwise you wouldn't have this horrible video to watch. And yeah, if you'd like to support my channel, then I do have a Patreon. If you're not gonna like go as far as straight up just buying a board outright for me, then there is Patreon, you know, where you can support me with like small contributions each month. There's a link to that down in the description below. If you'd like to buy some AHOC themed merch like shirts, socks, stickers, posters, hoodies, there is a link to Teespring down in the description below, and you'll find all kinds of, you know, stickers, shirts, posters, socks down there. So yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.